On the morning of January 26, 1966, Australia welcomed Australia Day under the brilliant summer. Sun-dot beaches like Glenelg and Adelaide were the perfect escape for thousands of families. Children's laughter filled the air. Colorful umbrellas dotted the sand. Waves lapped gently at the shore. It was a peaceful scene, a snapshot of post-war Australia, free, safe, and full of hope. But within just a few short hours, that calm was shattered. One ordinary family, the Beaumonts, slipped into a nightmare from which they would never wake. 3 children, Jane, aged 9, Arnna, 7, and Grant, just 4, left their home that morning to visit the beach. They promised to be home by early afternoon. From that moment on, no one ever saw them again. No bodies, no clear tracks, no cries for help, only an eerie silence, and a trail of vague clues that sent police, media, and the entire country into a spiral of confusion and fear. The Beaumont children case wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a turning point in Australia's history, a moment when the nation lost its collective innocence and parents stopped believing their children were safe simply because it was daylight. It reshaped an entire generation of parenting. And even now, nearly 60 years later, the name Beaumont echoes like a ghost through the memory of the Australian public. Unresolved and unforgiven. This isn't just a crime story, it's a dark national legend, born in a time when Australia still believed it was immune to evil. And now, in search of the truth, File X reopens one of the most chilling cold cases of all time, where the questions have never been answered and the silence speaks louder than words. January 26, 1966, a bright summer's day in Adelaide. The Beaumont family lived in Somerton Park, just over 3 kilometers from Glenelg Beach. Jane, 9, the mature, eldest child, had often been allowed by her mum to take her 2 younger siblings, Arnna, 7, and Grant, 4, to the beach on their own. Back then, that was completely normal. It was simply how things were. That morning, Nancy Beaumont gave Jane some money so the 3 of them could catch the bus, spend a few hours at the beach, and return home around lunchtime. She had no way of knowing that, in that very moment, she was unknowingly placing her children into the hands of something far more terrifying than fate. An invisible predator, the bus driver, and several beachgoers confirmed seeing the children playing at Glenelg. One witness recalled seeing them running and laughing with a strange man, tall, blonde, athletic, wearing blue swim trunks, someone who seemed oddly familiar to the children. What struck people as strange was this. Jane, normally a shy and reserved girl, appeared completely at ease around this man, even trusting a local bakery owner also remembered Jane stopping in to buy some snacks. But what shocked her mother later was this: the items Jane bought weren't what the kids usually liked. Even more unsettling, Jane had paid using a £1 note, a higher denomination than what Nancy had given her. Someone had given Jane extra money, and maybe earned her trust along the way. These small details, a stranger, a strange note, and unusual behavior, only began to feel truly chilling as the hours dragged on. By 2:00 p.m., Nancy began to worry. By 3:00 p.m., she was waiting at the bus stop. By 4:00 p.m., she phoned the police. No one had seen the children board a bus back. No calls, no cries, no sightings. They had simply vanished. Within 24 hours, the disappearance was declared a national emergency. Police officers, sniffer dogs, divers, and helicopters were deployed. Hundreds of volunteers combed the beach, scouring every meter of sand, every bush, every corner. Shops, homes, and vehicles were all searched, but not a single trace was found. No clothes, no blood, no clue. A postman who knew the Beaumont family said he saw the children walking with a man around 3:00 p.m. near their home. He said Jane greeted him politely. If the timeline holds, the children were still alive after they were meant to be home. So why didn't they go home? And who was the man? A theory emerged. The stranger had gained the children's trust and somehow lured them away from the beach, possibly leaving the area with them in a car. Some witnesses mentioned seeing a light-colored Holden leaving the vicinity shortly after the children vanished. But this was a time before CCTV, before the internet, before GPS. And evidence was slipping away like sand through fingers. It was a public holiday. But for the Beaumonts, it became the darkest day of their lives. And for Australia, it marked the end of innocence, a time when kids could go to the beach alone, and strangers were still seen as potential friends. From that moment on, Aussie parents began locking their doors earlier, holding their children's hands tighter, and looking at strangers with cautious eyes. The silent vanishing of 3 innocent children etched itself into the national memory, not just as an unsolved mystery, but as a deep scar on the psyche of a nation. When the lights from the first police cars lit up Glenelg Beach on the night of January 26, everyone believed the 3 children were simply lost. But by dawn the next day, there was no sign to support that assumption. Something deeper, darker, was waiting to be uncovered. The South Australian police quickly mobilized every available resource. They reviewed all bus routes and interviewed every driver. Search dogs were deployed to the sand dunes and nearby parklands. Professional divers combed the jetty area and deep water. Locals lined up at police stations, hoping to offer tips or simply to share in the growing fear. No credible clues were found. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no clear tire tracks. It was as if the children had vanished into thin air. Within a week, police identified 3 key details. The man in swimwear, described by multiple witnesses as a tall, athletic-looking blonde man, aged between 30 and 40, who spoke casually with the children. Some said he helped Jane put her dress back on after changing out of her swimsuit, an unsettling action when seen through a criminological lens. The mysterious banknote, Jane paid with a £1 note, more than what her mother had given her. This implied someone had given her extra money, possibly to gain trust or exert control. A letter from an impersonator. Years later, the Beaumont family received an anonymous letter, allegedly from Jane, claiming the children were safe and living with a kind man. But handwriting analysis proved it was fake, a cruel act that deepened their unending grief. Over more than 50 years of investigation, many names surfaced, but 3 suspects stood out and haunted the public imagination. A. Bevan Spencer von Einem, a convicted serial killer from the 1980s, responsible for the murders of several Adelaide youths. Some of his traits matched descriptions of the strange man at Glenelg, but no direct evidence linked him to the Beaumont case, and he consistently denied involvement. B. Arthur Stanley Brown, a suspect from Queensland, accused in a separate case of abusing and killing 2 young girls. Some witnesses believed he resembled the man seen with the Beaumont children. However, issues with time, location, and age made the connection inconclusive. C. Harry Phipps, a wealthy businessman living near Glenelg, known to have disturbing sexual tendencies. 2 witnesses, former child laborers in his garden, claimed they were hired to dig a hole in his backyard on the very day the children disappeared. Yet, after his death, a search of the garden turned up nothing. Every time a new suspect emerged, media coverage surged. The public hoped, and the police reopened their files. But all leads led to dead ends. Police collected over 10,000 statements and investigated more than 1,000 witnesses, yet no one could bring them closer to the truth. The Beaumont family, especially Jim and Nancy, spent decades locked in silent grief. They never moved from their home, remaining where the children had last departed, as if hoping the doorbell might one day ring. Over the years, more than 20 individuals confessed to the crime. Some offered detailed accounts, even drawing maps of the area, but all were false, driven either by mental instability or a desire for attention. The case morphed into a labyrinth of lies, further eroding hope for resolution. Before 1966, Australia was regarded as one of the safest countries in the world to raise children. A common sight in neighborhoods was children riding bikes, playing in parks, unsupervised and carefree. But after that fateful day on January 26, everything changed forever. The disappearance of the Beaumont siblings was a wake-up call for millions of parents. It shattered the illusion of child safety. The incident didn't just break one family, it marked the end of an era of collective innocence for the entire nation. From that point on, children were no longer allowed to walk to school alone. Adults began to distrust strangers, even familiar neighbors. The phrase stranger danger became a mandatory concept taught in schools and homes. Police and authorities established a nationwide child Abduction alert system, something that had not previously existed. A journalist once wrote, "Australia didn't lose 3 children. In 1966, it lost its peace of mind." The Beaumont case emerged at the dawn of black and white television entering Australian households. It became the first criminal case to be followed daily on TV screens, a precedent-setting moment. News of the case dominated the front pages of every major newspaper. Images of the tearful Beaumont family and the children's faces were plastered across millions of flyers, bulletin boards, and newscasts. Police were placed under immense pressure from the public, and media expected to deliver answers immediately. But the downside of that attention was baseless theories. Spread like wildfire, innocent people were accused, suspected, or even threatened. Some journalists violated the Beaumont family's privacy, hunting for sensational angles, pushing them deeper into despair. The Beaumont family, the greatest victims, gradually withdrew from the media. Jim and Nancy rarely gave interviews. Their silence wasn't due to an unwillingness to speak, but because they had already said everything, and no one truly listened. The Beaumont disappearance did not end with the news. It embedded itself in the public psyche and seeped into Australian popular culture. Crime novels, documentaries, and mystery fiction often reference the case as a symbol of unresolved tragedy. Some contemporary artworks explore the incident through lenses of collective grief and lost childhood. The Beaumont case became part of criminology curricula at several universities, a lesson in the limitations of pre-digital era investigations. Worse, the case was exploited by attention seekers, writing books, staging plays, or faking confessions to gain notoriety. The name Beaumont slowly became both sacred and profaned, depending on who was telling the story. The aftershocks of the case affected more than individuals or policy. They created a profound fracture in the community's psyche. Australians began to question the authorities, the police, the media, and even themselves. The fear of what couldn't happen actually happening led to a prolonged state of vigilance. Later missing persons cases, like Louise Bell, 1983, or Joanne Ratcliffe and Kirsty Gordon, 1973, were inevitably linked to the Beaumont case, even without solid evidence, deepening public anxiety. A psychologist once called the Beaumont case the first blow that cracked the dream of a post-war Australian utopia. And now, nearly 60 years have passed, yet the case remains unsolved. But the questions still linger, suspended in the space and memory of an entire nation. Where are those 3 children? Who was the man in the swimsuit that day? And why, on a sunlit afternoon, did a shadow fall that never lifted? 1. Hypothesis first, the lone killer. The man with the gentle eyes. This is the most widely accepted theory, based on witness accounts of a tall, blonde, athletic man seen on Glenelg Beach with the 3 children. The assumption is he lured the children with feigned kindness, offering money, food, and a sense of trust. He exploited the innocence of Jane, the eldest, who was obedient and responsible, to lead all 3 away from the crowded area. The children were then taken into a nearby parked car and vanished within minutes, as if into thin air. This theory aligns with criminal psychological profiles, especially the idea of a smart, calculated offender with possible prior offenses. However, its major weakness lies in the complete lack of physical evidence. No license plate noted, no security cameras, no blood, no cries for help. It was a kidnapping so perfect that it makes one question whether it even truly happened. 2. Hypothesis. Second, a hidden pedophile network. In the 1980s and 1990s, rumors spread about an underground ring in Adelaide involving prominent figures, lawyers, doctors, businessmen, who maintained respectable public lives but secretly ran a pedophile network. Strange coincidences include Harry Phipps, a wealthy businessman living near Glenelg, was a long-suspected individual. 2 men, who as children worked as gardeners at his home, claimed they were hired to dig a hole in his backyard on the very day the Beaumont children disappeared. Leaked documents suggest Phipps had a disturbing sexual interest in children. Many believe the children were not killed immediately, but possibly held captive for some time before being silenced to cover up the crime. Authorities have dismissed this theory as a conspiracy, However, with case files marked top secret for decades, the silence has only fueled suspicions that something is being hidden. 3. Hypothesis. Third, accident and cover-up. Some researchers propose that the case may not have started with a deliberate crime, but with a tragic accident. The scenario: a stranger or acquaintance took the children out with no ill intent. One of the children suffered an accident, fell, hit their head, or drowned. In panic, the adult decided to dispose of all 3 bodies to erase any evidence. This would explain the absence of screams, the children appearing calm as they left the beach, the lack of any clear motive for abuse or murder. However, this theory lacks any supporting evidence and relies solely on psychological speculation. Moreover, it's hard to imagine a regular person hiding 3 bodies without a single trace for nearly 60 years. 4. Hypothesis. Fourth, kidnapped and living abroad. There were rumors that the Beaumont children were smuggled out of Australia by ship or plane and are now living under different identities in another country, possibly in Europe or Asia. Supporting points include: in those days, ports and airports did not rigorously check children's identification. The children could have been renamed, disguised, or altered in appearance. Some witnesses in the Netherlands and Germany claim to have seen 3 children resembling Jane, Arnna, and Grant, speaking English and accompanied by an Australian man. However, this theory lacks practical evidence: no photographs, no passports, no confirmation from Interpol or any international agency. It all rests on a vague sense of familiar faces. A chilling revelation from Nancy Beaumont. Weeks before the disappearance, Jane wrote a school essay describing a family of 3 children going to the beach and meeting a new friend. That friend was very kind, gave them money, and spoke like a family member. In the story's ending, the 3 children left with that friend and never returned. At the time, adults thought it was pure imagination, but after the tragedy, the story's eerie similarity to real events gave everyone chills. Questions remain: was this a premonition from a sensitive child? Or had Jane already met the man? Could he have been grooming the children for weeks, slowly earning their trust? In 2018, an independent investigator requested the South Australian government to declassify all Beaumont case files. The request was denied, citing national interest. Why must a child disappearance from over half a century ago remain secret? Some believe police had leads but lacked evidence for prosecution and feared public backlash for mishandling the case. One or more socially powerful individuals were directly involved, or perhaps the truth is simply too horrifying to reveal. Conclusion: in mystery cases, people often say, the truth is out there, waiting for enough light to be seen. But in the Beaumont case, it feels like the truth has been entirely swallowed by darkness, leaving only stranger and stranger theories, and a sorrow that grows sharper with time. A few years after the disappearance, Jim and Nancy Beaumont, once the ideal image of Australia's middle-class parents, quietly separated. There were no public arguments, no blame, no drama, just a silent realization that they could no longer live together in a house. Missing the sound of 3 children's laughter, Nancy spent the rest of her life in quiet grief, passing away in 2019 at the age of 90. Jim is still alive, living privately, avoiding the media, and holding on to a small hope that one day the truth will come to light. We don't need someone to be arrested or punished. We just need to know where our children are. Jim Beaumont, 1996. In the memory of Australians, Beaumont children is no longer just the name of 3 missing kids. It's a national tragedy, a keyword forever tied to loss and lasting trauma. Playgrounds, schools, child safety signs, anti-abduction campaigns, all trace back to this one case. A country that once believed too strongly in the harmlessness of strangers was forced to change its view of society. And even without bodies, suspects, or a courtroom trial, the Beaumont case is still ranked among the worst crimes in world history. The Beaumont case became a harsh lesson for Australia's criminal investigation system. Police no longer ignore missing child reports. Every case is now treated as an emergency from the first moment. Forensics, criminal profiling, surveillance systems, and Population databases saw major improvements in the decades that followed. The case also laid the groundwork for Australia's participation in international agreements to share information on missing persons, aiming to prevent future tragedies like Beaumont. Yet, it also exposed the limitations of traditional investigative methods and the vital need for modern technology to unlock old mysteries. Over 59 years later, the Beaumont children case remains one of the most mysterious disappearances of the 20th century, not just in Australia, but worldwide. The file may be closed, but the questions are still open. Are the children dead or living? Under new identities somewhere? Who was responsible? A single person, a group, or a hidden system? Why was there not a single trace left behind? Perhaps the truth will never be fully known. At File X, we don't just retell cases. We explore the spaces between the facts where truth blurs into gray. And the Beaumont children case is a symbol of that gray zone where law, science, emotion, and obsession weave into an unsolvable web. This isn't just the story of 3 missing children. It's a case that never truly closed. And maybe, just maybe, you, watching this video, hold the final piece of the puzzle. File X, where Unsolved. Mysteries are told with respect, investigative perspective, and the light of memory. Hit follow. We'll return with more cases, each one a shadow, and each of you a light.